Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Spring 2021 meeting of the Boston University School of Medicine Dean's Advisory Board. I'm Dr. Donald Kaplan, and I'm honored to be the new chair of this group, which has provided counsel, I found out, to the dean for at least 50 years. This past year has demonstrated the remarkable resilience and ingenuity of the BU medical community, and we look forward to your continued guidance as we plan for upcoming academic years. Today, our presentations will focus on the medical school's innovation and response to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as our celebration of Rebecca Lee Crumpler, the first Black American woman to earn an MD degree. I'll now introduce the new members of the Dean's Advisory Board. They're joining us today as our special guests. Dr. Gabriella Avellino is a 2009 BUSM Masters in Science and a 2013 BUSM MD alumna. She is a urologist, an assistant professor of surgery in the urology division at Brown University Alpert Medical School. Her father, John Avellino, has been a board member since 2009. Dr. Stephen Burke is the Dean of Texas Tech University School of Medicine and Executive Vice President and Provost of Texas Tech University's Health Science Center, roles he has held since 2006. He is a 1975 BUSM MD graduate and completed his residency in internal medicine and a fellowship in infectious disease at Boston Medical Center. Dr. Ilaria Conti is the Executive Director of Early Clinical Development in Oncology at AstraZeneca in Waltham, Massachusetts. She attended the University of Pisa, where she earned her MD in 1996 and a PhD in medicine in 2004. Dr. Conti began her career as a specialist in pulmonology and was a postdoctoral fellow at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute before beginning her pharmaceutical career at the Eli Lilly and Company. Ken Menges is a 1979 Questrom School of Business graduate. He went on to complete his law degree at Harvard University. He currently serves as general counsel for E&J Gallo Winery and is a member of the BU Board of Trustees. Peter Paul is a Questrom School of Business MBA alumnus. He is the founder, chairman, and CEO of Headlands Asset Management, LLC. He is also an emeritus member of the BU Board of Trustees and served on the BU Choose to Be Great campaign on both the leadership and steering committees. Albert Rosenthaler is the Chief Corporate Development Officer of the Liberty Media Corporation, Liberty TripAdvisor Holdings, and Liberty Broadband Corporation. He is also the parent of a student in BUSM's class of 2021. Dr. Robert Scholze is an attending surgeon in the section of acute care and trauma surgery at Boston Medical Center, an associate professor of surgery at BUSM. He earned his bachelor's, master's, and medical degrees from Boston University and completed his residency training in general surgery at the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey and a fellowship in trauma and critical care at the University of Maryland. And finally, Beth McDermott is Vice President for Development at Boston University. She joined BU Development and Alumni Relations in May of 2020, after most recently working in various roles in development at Boston College and the Harvard Business School. So it is my pleasure to welcome these outstanding individuals to the advisory board, and we do look forward to their input. Before we begin today's presentations, a few housekeeping announcements. First, the meeting is being recorded. To assure the speakers are heard clearly, others will be muted by the host. We do encourage you to submit questions at any time using the chat function at the bottom of your screen. The host will be monitoring the chat throughout the meeting. There will be a limited amount of time for questions after each section, but the breakout sections will provide you the opportunity for in-depth discussion later in the program. And now, it's my pleasure to welcome Boston University Medical Campus Provost and School of Medicine Dean, Dr. Karen Antman, to provide an update on the school.
Thank you, Dr. Kaplan. I will put my share up. Hopefully this will work. This seems very slow, but if,
We're not seeing it yet. Oh, there you go, Karen.
okay, good. So this is the review. We last talked in October, and at that point we had told you how we had managed kind of like the first 6 months of COVID. But now this is the second 6 months. You can see that we've made lots of adjustments in the interim, and I'd like to bring you up to date. This is a superimposition of the number of cases in Massachusetts in our events, and in October we had basically told you about the pivoting to the new curriculum, graduating our MD class a month early, our anti-racism demonstrations in June, and actually our curriculum changes with respect to racism in July and August. We then welcomed our new classes, and our medical students got their shots of their vaccine along with the faculty in December and January, which was terrific because they were relatively safe by the time the peak occurred in January after the holidays. And now that curve is coming down nicely. We continue to have about 600 patients with COVID in the state at this time, so it's still an issue. Our medical PA dental students literally went to a volunteer vaccination clinic and formed a corps. We in Massachusetts need an army to give the millions of vaccines. Students that were already vaccinated by January and therefore should have been immune by February or March when the vaccinations ramped up in Massachusetts, vaccinated at BMC, BU, community health centers. And this was their way of giving back to centers that provided clinical training despite the COVID-19 pandemic. And you can see some of the students here practicing on each other, giving actual shots of saline as they went through their training so that they could be certified to be the volunteer vaccinators. Our graduate students actually never left the lab because basically we've always been able to have students in the labs. It's very easy to do 6-foot distancing in a lab where there's 2 people. And this is one of our students. I hope you enjoyed the Boston University magazine over the winter where she was kind of on the cover. She's not a doctor yet, Ellen Suter. She got her undergraduate degree at Irvine. She did a 2-year fellowship at the Rocky Mountain Level 4 lab, so she's perfect for us. In March, she had just finished her 4 months of training required to work with live viruses as part of her PhD thesis. And she just basically immediately switched to research projects, screening drugs for anti-COVID activity within the needle. You can see that research-wise, we've basically participated quite a bit in publications, COVID publications. More than 1,000 total publications as of last night, and I took a screenshot of this so that you could see what we're up to. The April ones are obviously not all in yet, but even so far this month, it's about 53 new articles. This actually is about 4% of the publications on COVID. That doesn't mean that we have done 4% of the publications. Many of our faculty are part of consortia that involve multiple medical schools and multiple academic medical centers. So but we're very much a part of research on COVID, and be happy to discuss that because it's really part of our mission. We've also had the Tony Fauci effect in our MD applications. We've been working on these applications since September. This is for our fall 2021 class in the MD program. We have similar issues with or similar trends with our graduate programs. But health sciences are really, applications are up nationally about 17%. School public health is up too. But notice that we're up 27% for our medical school. I'm not quite sure why this is so. It may be because of our commitment to the safety net population or whatever, but in any case, we're up more than others. It has been labeled the Tony Fauci effect. Students basically think this is a real way for me to make a difference. And our associate dean for admissions was on multiple TV shows and newscasts presenting on the Tony Fauci effect and why we have as many new applicants for next year as we do. It's also possible that given that you can't do a gap year, people are moving straight to medicine without a gap year because it's really difficult to do a gap year. So it could be something trivial, but we'll see whether this trend continues. We did have our match. This is our class of 2021 when they first arrived, because we can't take a picture of them because we can't get them all in the same space with masks on and 6-foot distancing. But they did have match day, and we were really worried about this one because everything was done online, as you can imagine. But here's the specialties. As usual, internal medicine is about a fifth of the group. Emergency medicine is very unusual. This is not the same for every medical school, but they're second in this class. Anesthesiology and pediatrics were third, general surgery fourth. You can see the various subspecialties going down, and after that it's onesie twosies. We also wondered whether people would stay local because it was all done online, and whether institutions in other states would be going national for taking graduates. But actually these numbers don't differ very much from prior years. About 40 are staying in the state of Massachusetts. It's a little bit up, so a little bit more local. 22 in New York. California was 19. Now, California and Massachusetts in the past were fairly close, so there might be somewhat of a trend to stay local here. People didn't know how they were going to get across the country. You can see that Pennsylvania was fourth, and Florida, Illinois, and Connecticut were thereafter. So you can kind of see the map. They basically matched all over the United States. We didn't have anybody in Hawaii this year, so it's just US, and sometimes we go up to Maine too. So, but they matched broadly all over the country, and they were really good matches. You can see some of the numbers here. We are keeping 21 of them in our BMC and Children's Hospital joint program. You can see that third was New York City Cornell, Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, UMass, few at Brigham and Women's, University of Chicago, very much a same culture. You can see that they got really nice residencies. This is our average medical school debt. We just got these statistics yesterday, so I plugged them in. You can see that our average medical school debt has been flat for the last 3 years, and I know that it will be flat for this year as well, because we know what the numbers are for our indebted students that are graduating this year. You can see that this is BUSM is the dark blue, private medical schools are the green, and all medical schools, which include the publics, are in the yellow orange. And we are doing better with keeping our students not totally out of line with respect to student debt. It's very hard because our cost of attendance is substantially higher because the cost of living in Boston is about $20,000. Looking a little bit more closely at the statistics, looking from left to right, we have a large class, and that will be coming down as we've discussed at the Dean's Advisory Board. We're now taking a smaller class so that we can give them a better clinical experience. But so the student aid is divided over a larger class, and you can see that we're at about the 75th percentile for size of class and about the same for total aid recipients. We have slightly lower than average, but not by much, total aid enrollment of about 81%. So 4/5 of our class does get aid. Our median parental income is at about the 45th percentile. So compared to other private medical schools, our students are a little bit poorer. The number of students receiving grants without service is above average, but that's commensurate with the size of our class. And you can see that we provide about $10 million worth of scholarship aid last year, and that is more than average. But it's not enough because basically our students are still above average in debt. So I just wanted to give you kind of like where we were at with respect to scholarships, which we are pushing very, very hard. You can see that we have not stopped renovating. The curriculum is moving to team-based learning in many cases. This is not ours. This is what we plan, not what we currently have. But with team-based learning, students are given problems and they actually get to work as a team to resolve them. And we are working with architects to, we have the space designated and the funds designated, and we will be starting construction on our team-based learning space sometime over the summer and fall. Our microbiology department, which currently is across the street from the Needle and from our infectious disease department, will be moving closer to the Needle and ID, so that we hope that they run into each other over coffee and are in the same buildings. And that way we'll have better collaborations between microbiology, infectious disease, and the Needle. The student residents had a field behind it. Actually some parents had supported the basketball court anonymously, but we figured out that the student residents, because only 11, we could only fit 11 of them with 6-foot distancing into the student lounge, and we couldn't put that many into the gym in the student residence. So we actually put lights out on the student field, and so that they could play late basketball and soccer and football and whatever. We had to do that because of COVID, and it was a really great investment that will go forward. And finally, some of our faculty in family medicine got a USAID grant to actually extend our medical campus in Lesotho, which is a country surrounded by South Africa with a very high HIV problem, but we have been involved in their medical education for decades. You can do a lot with building in Africa. So we will, not only do we have faculty on the ground there, but we have medical students and school of public health students. And this will give us a better campus for that initiative. Whoops, we moved here. We are delighted that the Rosenthalers have donated a substantial amount for our anatomy lab. It's getting a major facelift. Some of these things we've been able to do already. Some we have to wait until the students are out of the anatomy lab before we can do them. They are getting a new heating and ventilation system. Any of you who are alums remember how the odor of the anatomy lab stayed with you for hours after each lab, and this will allow us to put in state-of-the-art ventilation for the students. We will be putting in bright LED lights so you can see better when you're doing your dissections. And we did get state-of-the-art ultrasound systems, so we can be teaching radiology at the same time as we're teaching anatomy. Our radiology department and our anatomy department have been collaborating very nicely on anatomy radiology here. And all of our cadavers have CT scans so that they can teach CT scanning at the same time. And we were able with this donation to purchase these very expensive virtual anatomy tables. It was tricky this year to do dissections. We were allowed to put 2 with a cadaver at any given time, so we worked in shifts. Not optimal, but as good as we could do in anatomy. You'll hear more about the kickoff of our 175th anniversary, which is coming up in 2023. You'll hear a lot more about this going forward. We kicked it off with Rebecca Lee Crumpler's 190th birthday celebration. We have already exceeded 120,000 in an endowed scholarship for Black women. When she was a medical student in 1861, she received the Wade Scholarship. This is a scholarship that still supports our women at our medical school and currently is supporting a Black woman in our second-year class. So these scholarships go on, grow, and actually support our students over, that one's for 160 years. So I hope I've convinced you that we're thriving despite COVID. Maybe even we've got renewed energy because of the challenge. Our medical students were back in the clinic since last September. I was so much happier when they were vaccinated in December because then they were protected, but we did not have an outbreak. Our students are not happy with the COVID restrictions, and we are very happy that student research will be live this summer in the labs. We anticipate a live white coat matriculation because the state has just basically said that we're going to be able to do that. And we anticipate normal in-person classes because all of our students will be vaccinated. They'll still be wearing masks by the start of the semester in July and August. So I'd be happy to have any of your questions. Thank you. Let me get rid of this, the share so that we can see each other.
Well, Dean Atman, can you hear me?
I can.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for that very inspiring presentation. A lot of things going on.
Yeah.
One comment is the level of student debt seems to have plateaued over the last 3 or 4 years. And I wonder if having that living for the dormitory, whether that has really contributed to the leveling off of student debt. That's the first question. And while I have the floor, let me give you the second. If you could comment on what the incoming class looks like in terms of minority students, because as you know, I've been very concerned by the report from the AAMC authored by Mark Neve in 2015, showing that 25 fewer Black male students entered medical school in 2014 than in 1978. So I'd be interested in what the incoming class looks like in terms of diversity.
Okay, we'll start with the 3 strategies, and actually the Dean's Advisory Board a decade ago was key in putting these strategies together. Was the MSR, which came out of a Dean's Advisory Board meeting. That's the medical student residence. Then it was specifically intended to obviate that cost of living in Boston, because we can't affect rents in Boston, but we can certainly subsidize student expenses. And because the alumni actually donated 13 million of the total cost of 27 million for putting up the student residence, the students actually get subsidized housing for as long as they stay in the student residence. Now, some of them don't want to live in a dorm, but that does mean for students that have limited finances, they can live much more cheaply in the student residence than they can in Boston. So you are absolutely correct that that has made an enormous difference. The other 2 strategies is basically making scholarships the highest priority. And the third strategy is keeping the tuition increases as low as possible. And you can see that we have leveled off. We will level off until we actually kind of meet the other line so that we're at the level that other schools are. We can't actually decrease it. The increase in tuition this year is 2.8%, which is substantially below what BU is increasing their tuition for other students. But we've always we just don't go up quite as much as they do, and we've been able to level off. But the housing in Boston is ridiculously expensive, and the MSR has been absolutely key, and it was part of the strategy. With respect to minority students, with the last year's class in the October, I basically showed that our underrepresented minorities, predominantly Black and Hispanic, but we always have a smattering of Native, I don't know how we do this, but we always have a smattering of Pacific Islanders and Native Americans, and that's great. We currently have maybe 3 students from those groups as well. So it's not just Black and Hispanics, but they tend to bounce around the 20th percentile. It's a situation where we actually compete with them, compete for them, because as Dr. Sullivan suggests, there are so few that are applying that they tend to get into multiple schools. Our white students get into a median of 4 schools, and we want them to choose us, obviously. But our Black students, for example, get into a median of 7 to 10 schools, and therefore we're competing with 7 to 10 institutions for every student that we attract. And even with full scholarships, we lose them to Harvard with full scholarships, and no surprise. So it's always heartbreaking when we do, but it's reality. So we actually, many of them do come to our medical school because of our mission. And but it's not for lack of admitting them and really competing to get them. And rightfully so, and also contributing to the pipeline. We have our EMSSP program. We have pipeline programs with summer research in the summer for about 80 Boston students. And those students, if they go to Boston University, get a break there too, and then we hope to recruit them back to the medical school. I better end here because I think that we've got some timing issues.
Okay.
I'd be happy to discuss this further with you. Well, you know,
Great.
we very much appreciate your support for this.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Anman. Now Susan Maselli, Associate Dean for Development, will provide a development and fundraising update.
Thank you so much, Don. It's so great to see all of you, albeit remotely. Good morning. We'll look forward to seeing some of you in person, hopefully in the fall. And now I'd like to share with you some updates in revenue and gifts since our fall meeting. Next slide. Corey's running my slides. There we go. Thanks so much. So this gives you a look at cash-in giving from fiscal year over fiscal year, starting in FY 2011. The numbers are in millions. The blue bars on the bottom are gifts received for facilities or capital projects. The orange is current use revenue, and the gray bars on the top are investments in our endowment. In fiscal year 2016, we did receive 2 large 8-figure gifts, which explains the spike. In fiscal year 2020, the full last quarter of the fiscal year, our labs were shut down. And so we did see a drop in research revenue coming in. This year, at this point, we are almost where we were at the end of FY20. So we anticipate probably another $5 to $7 million by the end of this fiscal year. Next slide. And here you can see where the revenue comes from. Our revenue is always primarily from corporations, foundations, organizations, and associations, and those investments are primarily for research support. We are also so grateful to our alumni, our parents, our BU trustees for their generous gifts from year to year. And every year we do see realized bequests coming in from trusts and estates, and those are commitments that have been made in some cases many years ago. And then our friends typically do give in honor or in memory of a deceased loved one, and those investments are primarily for research. Next slide. I'd like to give a special shout out now to our Dean's Advisory Board members, Drs. Hockman and Golub, for their commitments to establish endowed scholarships to support our students. We're so grateful for that support and for all of these donors that you see on this slide. And I would also like to point out the recent fund that Dr. Walton established in honor of Charles Terrell. So Charles Terrell, for 25 years, worked at the BU School of Medicine as our Dean of Student Affairs and the Director of Student Financial Services. He left BUSN right around the time that Dean Antman joined us. And he is also a BU alumnus. He received a master's in African American Studies in 1971. We do believe that there are many alumni who are also going to want to contribute to this fund in Mr. Terrell's honor. Next slide, please. I'd like to recognize and thank Dr. Corky for documenting a bequest in her estate of $1 million to support the Barbara Corky Professorship in our Department of Medicine, which is also supported by the Evans Medical Foundation. And we will be installing the first Corky Professor on May 20th, and that will be Dr. Katya Ravid. And I would like to as well mention a bequest that was established by Dr. Vaidukaitis. Judith Vaidukaitis was a renowned reproductive neuroendocrinologist whose research actually led to the first home pregnancy test. Dean Antman has determined that this bequest will establish an endowed fund that will support research for our medical students. And in this case as well, we're hoping that we will receive support from other alumni, friends, and parents as well. Next slide. Thank you. Recent foundation giving highlights include contributions to our Alzheimer's research from the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation for the Framingham study, as well as from Cure Alzheimer's Fund for Dr. Weiming Jia's research. The Cystic Fibrosis Foundation is supporting grants in the Center for Regenerative Medicine. And Chris Stifel continues to support our amyloidosis research every year through the Wildflower Foundation. Finally, Gates Ventures is supporting Dr. Rhoda O's research. Next slide. This is actually a combined slide that gives you an interesting look at our endowed scholarship at the School of Medicine. The numbers on the left, which are in millions, show you principal commitments. Those are the red bars. So those are the actual contributions to endowed scholarship. And the blue bars show you the market value. So it's really amazing how this money grows over time once it's invested in the endowment. We're currently at around $67 million market value in endowed scholarship. And the gray line on the top with the numbers on the right show you the annual income that's generated for our students from this endowment. We're currently reaching almost 2.5 million, and that averages to about 16,000 per students. As Dean Antman mentioned, this is our #1 priority. We're continuing to raise support for endowed scholarship. And as well, every year, of course, we receive current use dollars that all go to our students. Next slide. So Dr. Antman did speak about Dr. Crumpler, the wonderful week that our Alumni Relations Office, Communications and Development celebrated her 190th birthday in February. And in a little while, you will actually be hearing from a few of the panelists on the Rising Star Symposium a little bit later. We are at around $120,500 from 74 donors, and we are going to look forward to receiving more support specifically for the Crumpler Scholarship. So here's our team. I hope that many of you already know many of us, or if not, you'll get to know us. Maura Copley and Regina Garland work with alumni, parents, and friends on their support. David Gillerman, Catherine Canfield, and Catherine D. Robertis work with foundations. Nick Sims and Corey Bailey support our efforts with events, appeals, stewardship of our donors. And of course, Corey works very closely with all of you on the Dean's Advisory Board. And I would like to welcome the newest member of our team, Wesley Jones, who has just this month joined us as our Senior Development Coordinator. Any one of us would be happy to help any one of you. And does anyone have any questions? Next slide, thank you. And you can stop sharing. I'm happy to answer any questions, or else we can move on in our agenda.
I think we'll move on. That was a very complete report, and I do thank you, Suzanne. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced us to rethink the delivery of healthcare and adapt much patient care to a virtual format. Although our ability to meet with patients in person is returning, increased use of telemedicine will be here to stay. To continue preparing our students to be the next leaders in healthcare, the medical school has begun incorporating telemedicine concepts into our curriculum. We are joined this morning by Dr. Juhi McDougall, an assistant professor of medicine and the clerkship director for fourth-year medical students in the Advanced Internal Medicine Ambulatory Clerkship. She will discuss some of the curriculum changes the medical school has made to assure the continuation of a strong physician-patient relationship in a virtual world. Welcome, Dr. McDougall.
Hello, everyone. Let's see, I'll mute myself. Okay, great. Hello, everyone. It's nice to meet you all. I will be sharing my slide now. Okay. And okay, share screen. And it looks like that is, okay, here it is. Thank you all for your patience. All righty. So thank you for the introduction. So I'm a primary care internist at Boston Medical Center. And let me share with you a little bit of what happened a year ago that allowed me to, share with you our experiences in telemedicine at the medical school here today. So the COVID-19 pandemic, as we all know, necessitated the sudden uptake of telemedicine. And I probably cannot emphasize the word sudden well enough. Tuesday, March 17, 2020, prior to that day, none of us, faculty, residents, medical student, have ever provided patient care via telemedicine. And everything sort of changed that day. Students were suddenly pulled from all patient contact while we were trying to figure out what was going on with the pandemic and with the PPE scarcity. We had in primary care 100% switch from in-person clinic to telemedicine at BMC primary care. And within that time span, BMC scheduled 1,500 virtual visits over the healthcare system. And this is with crash orientation via emails and Zoom meetings on how to use Zoom, how to call patients securely, how to bill, how to document, and how to supervise trainees. And I like to point out the VA health system as sort of leaders in telemedicine. They have had a lot of experience in providing telemedicine, especially for patients who have had really difficulty accessing care. These are the patients who live very, very far in a rural setting. And here's a picture of a robot used in actually one of the hospitals in Boston doing virtual rounding of patients sick with COVID in the hospital when PPE was incredibly scarce a year ago. This looks like, a stuff from the future, but in fact, it is here today with us. So you might wonder, do we have any sort of guiding principles on how to deliver telemedicine effectively? So thankfully, we have the AAMC to give us some competencies, because I think a lot of you have practiced medicine in the past and also are on the receiving end of medicine as well, and probably have experienced telemedicine in the past year. So, how do we preserve the patient-doctor relationship on telemedicine? What are these principles we should consider? How do we keep our patients safe? What's an appropriate use of telemedicine? When do we say, ooh, we cannot evaluate chest pain any further on telemedicine, say that they have to come in? Weighing and a lot of patients are and ourselves too, very scared last year, delaying even care for chest pain. And you are all invested in our medical school's mission to promote health equity. And, how do we do this considering, access and equity? Imagine, being homeless or without phone data. How do you have the privacy and the internet bandwidth to connect on a video call with your PCP? We have our students think through pros and cons of telemedicine through the lens of our own patients. I don't know if any of you might have family members who are limited English speakers. However, a year ago, we did not have interpreter services available for our video platform. And so these are patients who are kind of sort of automatically excluded from video visits. Thankfully, recently BMC changed its vendor so that we can seamlessly integrate with the interpreter now. Another thing that sort of was very relevant to my own practice is that, my colleague and friend who practices at Brigham, her visits are 100% video, whereas like our own rates at BMC, especially in primary care, is quite low, less than 30%. And video visits are reimbursed at a significantly better rate than telephone visit. And I say that this, likely leads to further disparities as a healthcare system. We may not be able to provide as much telemedicine in the future. There's also communication to think about, especially when we're on the telephone. We teach our students that, there are so much that we do in nonverbal communication and building rapport. So we need to do that as much as we can on the telephone. So we teach our students to employ mirroring, summarizing, and doing teach backs. And a lot of words such as, I hear you, can you say that again? Or did I hear you correctly? To really let them know that we are listening without all the verbal cues. We also have to consider other things such as data collection technology and ethical and legal requirements that are a bit different than in person. I'm curious to know if any of you have had physical exams done over video and what that was like for you. But it is possible to obtain objective data. If you're comfortable, I like to demonstrate, if you feel free to follow along if you want to. But when I'm examining the shoulder, I will demonstrate to the patient. Now we're gonna test your range of motion and have you go up like this. And if I see that one arm is able to go all the way up, but the other arm not, then you might have a frozen shoulder on the arm that is not able to go all the way up. Or I have them do an empty can test to pretend to pour a can of soda down. And if there's pain with that movement, then it may be a rotator cuff. So there are some things that can translate really well over video telemedicine that obviously is not possible on telephone only visits. And this is a resource that we use for our students. Stanford Medical School has released many videos right at the beginning of the pandemic on how to do different systems for physical exam. And you might wonder, what is it like in a telemedicine session where we are not only with a patient, but also teaching our students and precepting our students at the same time? So we like to mirror what we do in person. But I remember in the beginning having to really spell out to everyone exactly how to do it because it's all new. When there's a layer of technology between you and everyone else, like how do you interface with that? So, I send a Zoom link to my student. Priya was actually doing telemedicine with me last week and allowed me to share her photo with you all. And this is the mock patient here is my husband, who also allowed me to show him, show you all his video, his picture. So I'll send a Zoom link to Priya saying, we're gonna meet at this time. Let's meet about 5 minutes before, or 5 to 10 minutes before clinic starts to go over any questions, expectations, and also to best select, patients that might be very, most appropriate for her. So she may, be calling a patient at the same time that I'm seeing another patient, since I have like 12 patients scheduled, and she'll be seeing about 3 to 4. So, we'll go over explicit instructions that we're going to turn off, put ourselves on mute, turn off our video, and then jump on, either the phone to call our patients for telephone only visits or for video visits. Thankfully, the video vendor is actually on a different platform. And so we can have Zoom and this other video platform running at the same time and get on with the patient on there. And then when she is done with speaking to the patient, gathering the history and doing as much of the provider sort of patient guided physical exam, come back and turn on the video and unmute herself on Zoom and say, hi, Dr. McDougall, I'm ready to present. Are you ready? And I'll say, oh, yeah, definitely, I'm ready. We talk over the case, she presents, we come up with a plan, and then we hop onto the other platform to conclude the visit together with the patient. So you can imagine this is sort of very much the same as what we do in person, just, with all of us at home rather than in clinic. So with that, I'd like to just summarize some of our challenges and lessons learned. So in the beginning, especially when this was so new to everyone involved, the health, it was new for our IT team, our health system, all of the physicians, all the medical students, all the residents. It was hard to be efficient at anything. So I remember everything just being so hard. Plus, the stressful nature of COVID definitely did not help. But we definitely have learned a lot and now share best practices with everyone. The technology aspect, I think, our students are super brilliant and we're able to pick up everything very quickly, but there's definitely a learning curve for all, especially when you're navigating Zoom plus a phone app to hide your own phone number, but to display the clinic phone number so that the patients will pick up. Otherwise, they're going to think you're a spam caller. And a different video platform, as well as having Epic open and another computer screen. So, all of us are using 3 to 4, at least two to 3 devices all at once. There's a lot of faculty development and student teaching and development that we have done over the year in order to get everyone up to speed, as none of us have learned this ourselves in medical school. Now that is different for our future medical school graduates. And our physical exam. This is one area where we were able to utilize some of the resources, such as the Stanford Medical School videos, but it's an opportunity for us to invest, especially in the preclinical years, to use standardized patient actors. I can imagine a scenario where we would use them for doing teaching and learning and demonstrating the different systems of exam, because it's one thing to learn how to do the exam in person, and it's definitely another skill set to know how to demonstrate and verbally as well as physically demonstrate what needs to be done and how to interpret it. And I'd like to mostly conclude by saying telemedicine is definitely here to stay. There is insurance reimbursement for it. That was, I think, the biggest barrier prior to the pandemic. And there is definitely patient demand. I imagine that many of you might have done telemedicine, myself included, found it very convenient to not have to drive to my doctor's office, park, walk, wait, be roomed, wait again, and spend a half day doing a visit, especially when there's not, especially for certain conditions such as like chronic disease management and other things like that. So with that, thank you for allowing me to share my experience, and I love to answer any questions, and look forward to meeting some of you at our breakout session later.
Questions for Dr. McDougall? I do have a question. Do you have a set of specific criteria at which point you tell patients you have to come in to be physically seen?
Yes.
Is there a specific criteria for that?
I definitely think that we should outline them specifically more, but of course, emergency is one. Another one is when on the differential is an acute problem that we cannot rule out by video visit, that necessitates an exam for us to determine what happens next, and the video visit is just not enough. That would be one where we bring them in. So presence of red flag symptoms, I think, are most frequently the reason why we bring them in.
Very good.
Quick question, Dr. McDougall, thank you for that. Have you had any experience that you can share with us where using telemedicine, you ran into issues with delays in diagnosis and treatment because of now having to bring the patient in and time lost with that next step?
Yeah, I'm very specific reason. It's hard to, or a very specific example. It's hard to say. The good thing is, especially even a year ago when, I think one thing I failed to mention is that we were 100% telemedicine a year ago, and now we're going toward about 25% telemedicine and 75% in person. So the in-person availability is a lot better now. Even a year ago, we always had a physician or provider in clinic who was able to see someone that day or later to accommodate, to try to prevent delays. But I can imagine a situation where, some things were kind of lost over video or telemedicine that really was urgent, and they might have mist triage the urgency, and that leading to delay. but I think I can think of more reasons of patients not seeking care, thinking that they could not be seen. There are a lot of assumptions by patients, understandably, that they couldn't come in. So, there are definitely some, breast masses and other things that people very much delay, which was really unfortunate.
Has the use of telemedicine expanded the reach of the medical center? Are you seeing patients from areas where you previously had not been? And my other question is, what is the level of satisfaction expressed by the patients with the availability of telemedicine?
Yeah, actually, I think patients have very much appreciated it. As many of you know, our medical license only allows us to practice in the state that we're licensed. So previous to the pandemic, I could not provide care to people who, lived in other states. Now, with the pandemic and with the emergency sort of acts that were passed, like temporarily, we're allowed to provide telemedicine if they're not currently in Massachusetts. That probably will be changing. And with people, especially early on when they were, traveling and got stuck. I had some patients who were stuck in Texas, stuck in Florida, stuck in different parts of the country, where I could refill their medication and send it to their local pharmacy, triage things, let them know what things we could wait on until they came back to Boston, and what things I wanted them to seek care, an urgent care or something like that, in the other state that they were in. I've had a couple of patients book their video and telemedicine visits while they were abroad, and at that I told them, I call them and I say, "Oh, where are you located? Are you home?" They're like, "Oh, I'm in Cape Verde." I say, "Okay, now I think this is legally and ethically beyond what I can provide. I'm happy to refill your medication and have your family send them to you for chronic care, but you should really, seek additional care there." Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. McDougall. This is clearly an area that's seeing a lot of change and a very great promise, but a great number of pitfalls as well. And I'm glad we're navigating that and keeping it as current as we can.
Great.
Since the very beginning of the pandemic, the BU Medical School has been engaged in robust COVID-19 research. Our next panel highlights some of the very first faculty and students to rapidly shift the focus of their research in early 2020. Please welcome Dr. Elke Mühlberger, Professor of Microbiology, who will introduce her panelists.
Yeah. So I'm not going to share the screen, somebody else does, and this is not presenter view. But I can already start to let you know that I'm really honored to be here and talk a little bit about our work on SARS-CoV-2 and more importantly about the students, the graduate students who were part of this huge research endeavor we had. So, wait, I have to go back. Okay. So the building you can see here is actually the reason why I decided to join BU in 2008. This is a National Emerging Infectious Diseases Laboratory. And this building provides all the infrastructure that is required. So I try to switch, maybe, I think it doesn't work very well here. Maybe, Christy, if you can take over.
It's not letting me give you remote control. I'm sorry, just let me know when you want me to advance the slide.
Yes, please do that. Yeah. Okay. So the beauty of this building is that it provides all the infrastructure that is required to work with really highly pathogenic viruses that are a huge threat to human health. So an example of that is Ebola virus here in the left corner. So, and the infrastructure provides the ability to work with these viruses and do really very, very good research. The people in my lab, all of them are trained to work with these viruses under very safe conditions in the biosafety level 4 laboratory. And this includes the graduate student, for example, here, I can't, fortunately don't have control here, but the blonde lady here in the suit, this is Ellen Suter, you will meet her later. And then here on the left-hand side, this is Stephen Ross. He is a graduate student who just joined the BSL-4 training program. So we are experts in studying biosafety level 4 viruses, such as Ebola virus. So when the pandemic hit the world, basically, We didn't have any intention to work on SARS-CoV-2 because SARS-CoV-2 is a BSL-3 virus, and that is not what we actually do. But then, next slide, please. I attended a multidisciplinary meeting where we talked about respiratory diseases and of course, specifically about SARS-CoV-2 and COVID. That was in March 2020. And there was this person here, Daryl Cotton, the director of the Centers for Regenerative Medicine. And he was quite desperate because he had these beautiful lung cells sitting in his incubator. So the lung cells that are usually sitting deep in the lung of people and that are the main target cells for SARS-CoV-2 and do a lot of harm. And he was desperately seeking virologists infecting these cells. And then next, please, Christy. I, in a split second, decided, yes, that's what we're going to do, and told him, Daryl, give us your cells, we are going to infect them. Next slide. So he gave us the cells. And then in March 26, we started to work on SARS-CoV-2. So we did the first infection experiment in March. And that was a very, very weird time, a very eerie time, because everyone went into lockdown, BU, Boston, the entire world. But our lab went completely crazy because we were so busy with virology work. And because, next slide. So I realized very quickly that there was a huge demand for virology support. So we were so much needed because so many people had antivirals or systems they wanted to test it for SARS-CoV-2, but there weren't enough virologists to test all these antivirals and to do all this work. So we decided to provide virology support to the general research community and finally ended up with more than 20 collaborators. Some of them are listed here. I feel that, it was an incredibly successful approach. So one of the compounds we tested, and actually Ellen tested, she was the first one who put her hands on this compound, is now in phase 2/3 clinical trial. We ended up with 4 fantastic publications, and there are more in the pipeline. We got 5 grants to support this kind of work, 3 contracts, and Ellen and I actually ended up on a patent, which is also kind of funny. So next slide, please. So despite all the tragedy and sadness that came along with SARS-CoV-2 and the pandemic, it was an amazing year for us because this experience to be part of this huge research net with the same goal. So everyone had the same goal. We wanted to combat this virus and we wanted to help contain the pandemic. So that was an amazing experience. But the most amazing part of this was actually seeing the compassion and the commitment of and the passion of our graduate students who were involved in this work and who worked actually like dogs day and night to help contain the pandemic. And now you have the pleasure to meet 3 of them. Next slide, please. So 3 of the students who did a lot of work on SARS-CoV-2, and these are Ellen Zuder, who is a PhD student in my lab, and we'll talk about her work in a minute, and then Christy Abo, who is an MD PhD student in Andrew Wilson's lab at the Cram, and Christy defended 1 or 2 weeks ago, so congratulations again, Christy, great job. And then finally, Aditya Mittal, who is an MD PhD student in Gustavo Mostoslavsky's lab, again at the Cram, and Aditya, he is defending today at 2 p.m. So fingers crossed that everything went well. And so now I pass the baton along to Ellen, and you will hear about her fantastic work and about SARS-CoV-2.
Thank you, Elke. So hi, I am Ellen. I am a 3rd-year PhD candidate in Elke's lab, and like she described, I have spent the majority of the past year doing SARS-CoV-2 research and performing infections for a lot of our collaborators. Here I've shown kind of a schematic of the majority of the work that I've been doing, which has been a lot of testing potential antiviral therapies and various drugs that might be able to be repurposed for antiviral therapies. Down there in the bottom below the schematic is a picture of me at work in our BSL-4. And on the top there is a diagram of what we do. I take cells, I treat them with a drug that might be able to protect cells against virus or clear viral infection once it's started. I do all of this in the BSL-4. I infect them with the virus. I let the virus go for a little while, and then I inactivate the entire sample using methods that we had to get approved to be allowed to take samples out. And I bring them out into the regular lab and stain them for virus so I can detect it by microscopy, and then find out how well the drug treatment did at reducing the infection rate. And so if you can click, there we go, thank you. This is a picture that not real data, but I wanted to show it off anyway because it was really cool to get to see under the microscope what these infected cells look like. So those cells that are bright green with all those little red dots in them are infected, and all of those little red dots are areas where viral replication is actually happening as we watch. So next slide. So here's just a quick demonstration of what some of that data looked like. Those cells on the left there are untreated cells that I infected with virus. On the right are ones that I treated infected with virus. And as you can see, this drug worked wonders in the cells that I tested. And we were able to advance it to clinical trials using some of the data that I generated, in addition to some of our collaborators as well. So it's really exciting to have been able to be a part of this really important and fast-paced and constantly changing research world. So I'd like to pass it on to Christy.
All right, thanks, Ellen. So my name's Christy Abo. As Elka mentioned, I'm an MD PhD student. And so my contribution to the COVID-19 research was modeling the infection in the lung. And so as Elka mentioned, there's the Center for Regenerative Medicine. Daryl Cotton and Andrew Wilson were those PIs who provided the iPS-derived lung cells to be infected with SARS-CoV-2. I also wanted to give you a little overview of how I came to be. So I went to undergraduate at Dartmouth College. And then after college, I actually taught for 3 years in Hartford Public Schools in Hartford, Connecticut. And so I was a middle school science teacher. And then I decided to pursue the MD PhD training here at BU. So as Elka mentioned, I work in the distal part of the lung, the gas exchange part, which is, of course, one of the critical compartments that's affected in COVID-19. And one problem that researchers have faced with studying this part of the lung in a dish is that these cells are really hard to maintain in vitro for studies such as how does the virus enter the cell, or what antivirals can we use that would specifically work in this cell type. And so in the Center for Regenerative Medicine, students and postdocs before me have developed protocols where we can direct the differentiation of induced pluripotent stem cells into cells that resemble these epithelial cells of the distal lung. And then we can infect those cells with SARS-CoV-2 with the collaboration of Elka's lab and others at the Needle. And so this is an overview of one of our projects that was published in this one was published in Cell Stem Cell, where we looked at what is the host response to the virus. And we were also able to use this platform for drug testing. And next we have Aditya.
Great, yeah, thanks everyone, and I'm really honored to be here. So I'll also just give you sort of a brief introduction about who I am, and then I'll take you briefly through some of the work that we did with Elka's lab. So as Elka mentioned, my name is Aditya, and I'm an MD PhD candidate in Gustavo Mostislavsky's lab at the Center for Regenerative Medicine. And I'm originally from New York City, and I went to Johns Hopkins prior to matriculating at BOSM 6 years ago now. So it's been a while, but as Elka mentioned, I'm excited today to be finishing my PhD, hopefully, and moving back onto medical school. And so my project in terms of the COVID research was actually looking at SARS-CoV-2 in the gastrointestinal tract and in the intestine. And so while most of you probably know that COVID-19 is primarily a respiratory virus that causes significant respiratory symptoms, sort of studying this virus in other cell types is actually particularly important to understand viral spread, and infection of cell types that are not in the lung can also potentially contribute to COVID-19 severe disease. And so we wanted to sort of further investigate this using a similar platform to what Christy mentioned, but instead of taking those stem cells and making them into lung cells, we ended up actually making them into intestinal cells. And so I would make these sort of little organoids, which are sort of small balls of cells that we grow in the dish that resemble some of the features of the colon and proximal intestine as I mentioned, in the dish yet. And then we hand those off to Elka's lab, who did all of these beautiful infection experiments. And so you can see in the middle of the slide here, an infected organoid, and that red that you're seeing is positive staining for SARS-CoV-2. And then my favorite picture from all of this work are those characteristic coronavirus virions, or viral particles, that are produced by the gut epithelial cells that we infected. And so those are really sort of textbook coronavirus particles. And so it was really exciting and scary to sort of see this amount of virus being produced by these cells. And you can only imagine what's actually going on in the body of a patient infected with SARS-CoV-2. And all this work sort of led to a publication, which is cited there on the bottom of the slide. And then I also, sorry, you can go ahead, Christy. And then I also wanted to just briefly highlight, although this is not COVID-19 research, I was also part of the group that some of you may have heard about that developed our own sort of in-house FDA EUA approved COVID-19 diagnostic test for Boston Medical Center that was used by BMC physicians. And we performed the tests at the CREM in March and April prior to the sort of widespread availability of testing. And so I was part of the team that was able to do this. And that was also sort of a really rewarding and unforgettable experience. And I was just glad that we were able to at least do something to sort of help and try and mitigate the worst effects of the pandemic right at the beginning, when no one really knew what was going on and things were extremely uncertain and frightening, honestly. So with that, I think we'd love to take questions. Is that, yep. Yeah, so that's all I have, but we'd love to take your questions.
I think we'll hold the questions for the breakout sessions, as we are running a bit behind, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you very much, Liz. It's very tantalizing to hear this taste of the research that's going on and the importance of it and significance in the COVID epidemic. I think there's been a tremendous focus on vaccine production, but there's much more to this than just vaccine production. We're going to have to be ready with therapies and understanding the disease better if we're really going to put COVID in its place. So thank you all very much. In February, the medical school hosted a week of events honoring Rebecca Lee Crumpler, the first Black American woman to earn a degree in medicine. This was awarded by the New England Female Medical College, which became Boston University's School of Medicine in 1873, approximately 10 years after her degree. A highlight of the week was the panel discussion with several of the rising stars in medical care. Today, Dr. Samantha Kaplan, Assistant Dean for Diversity and Inclusion and Assistant Professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology at BU School of Medicine, will give us a taste of that panel. Welcome, Dr. Kaplan.
Hi, it's so nice to be able to be here and talk to all of you. We have today one small piece of the week-long event that we had, which was an amazing event to really increase people's awareness and understanding of Dr. Lee Crumpler, who, well, particularly to the three of us on this screen, was really inspirational and motivating as the first African-American female physician, and the fact that she came from BUSM. The week included a number of different events. One was some amazing female leaders. There was a conversation about COVID, actually kind of akin to what I just heard the very last bit of, a conversation with some of the students from our primary pipeline program. And then this panel of rising stars, who are what I would call younger women, not young women, but younger women relative to me and probably many of you, who are really carving out their space in medicine and are doing amazing things, who are graduates of BUSM. We had 4 panelists, and today we are lucky enough to be joined by 2, and we're going to give you a small taste of the kind of conversation that we had. I can introduce them very quickly, but it's going to be very brief because we only have a short bit of time, and I really want you to hear mostly from them. So I would first like to say I'm very privileged to have been part of the training of both of these physicians, in that I met them both as medical students when I was here longer ago, and I've been here for about 20 years. I am also very proud because they have both gone into OBGYN, which is my field, and I would like to think I had a small amount to do with that, although maybe not a lot. And so with us, we have Dr. Ebony Woolcock, who is also an Assistant Dean of Diversity and Inclusion here at Boston University School of Medicine and runs the Early Medical School Selection Program, which is a partnership pipeline program that we have that she can tell you a little bit more about. And she also has a role in our department as a leader, as one of the associate clerkship directors. We also have another amazing and upcoming academician in Dr. Dallas Reed, who is just down Washington Street at Tufts Medical Center, where she is the Division Chief of Genetics and the Director of Perinatal Genetics, an assistant professor at Tufts University School of Medicine, and also has a new leadership role with telemedicine and how to use that effectively at Tufts. So, I was going to start off with a very basic question and ask you both to tell us a little bit about what you're currently doing and your experience of being women leaders of color in academic medicine at your respective institutions. Dr. Woolcock?
Can you hear me? So a lot of what I do, Dr. Kaplan just highlighted. So I do have the background of the program that I'm currently running, the Early Medical School Selection Program here at BU School of Medicine. I'm actually a graduate of that program myself. So I did attend Hampton University and then entered BU School of Medicine through the Early Medical School Selection Program, which is a pipeline program from several undergrads into BU. Graduated from the med school here with an MD MPH, finished a residency program, and then went to go work at another hospital in Boston, but returned back here in 2018. Since I've returned back here, I have a lot of different roles, kind of split between the hospital and the medical school. So as Dr. Kaplan said, I am an obstetrician gynecologist. So, you know, that kind of runs the full gamut of taking care of women in the office, delivering babies, doing C-sections, doing gynecologic surgeries. But I also have another role in the department as the associate clerkship director. So as you know, all of the medical students have to rotate through OBGYN as one of their core clerkships. And so the two people that run it will be the clerkship director and the associate clerkship director. So I am part of the team that directs their medical education in OBGYN when they're on-site and off-site. And then if they choose to go into OBGYN, I'm also what's called a field specific advisor. And so I advise them on programs to apply to, their interviews, kind of the whole process of entering into residency in OBGYN. So that is part of one part of my role. I also have a role here in diversity as an assistant dean of diversity and inclusion. And that, again, is something else that runs the full gamut. So I support students who are trying to get into medical school, either through the Early Medical School Selection Program, but I'm from Boston. And so I sit on the board of some of the schools in Boston, and I'm still very involved in the community. So I help a lot of the Black and Brown students and kids in Boston who think they want to enter healthcare and think they want to become physicians. So I help them before they even get anywhere close to being at medical school. So I help them kind of apply for college, help them through college, et cetera. So that is part of my personal passion and my dean job. As a dean at the school, I assist with many of the diversity initiatives, including the Racism in Medicine VIG that we just did, which looked at ways in which we can change the curriculum, both preclinical and clinically, to incorporate more anti-racism into remove racism that is embedded in our curriculum and implement more anti-racism into our curriculums and evaluate how that went. You know, did schools do it? Did different clerkships do it? So I think that is the gist of the majority of what I do, clinical, medical education, and here at the diversity side with EMSSP and the Diversity and Inclusion Office.
Thank you, Dr. Woolcock. And Dr. Reed, tell us what's going on with you at Tufts, and if you can connect a little bit of it to what you did here.
Sure. So thank you to Dr. Kaplan and to the Dean's Advisory Board for inviting us. It's a privilege, really. So similar to Dr. Woolcock, I also came through the Early Medical School Selection Program, and that's how I became, aware of medicine and in a medical student. I went to Dillard University, which is a historically Black college in New Orleans, and then spent a year abroad actually in London before spending my senior year in Boston, which is part of the program. So it was obviously a very instrumental part of my training. I hadn't ever shadowed a doctor before or thought I was interested in medicine, but didn't know why. I had no experience in that area. And the first person I actually shadowed, which was part of the program in the summertime, was Dr. Witzberg, actually. So he was like the first physician role model that I saw, and there really isn't any better one than him. BU really prepared me very well. I left medical school and then went to residency in OBGYN, like Dr. Kaplan said, in Connecticut. And then I did a genetics fellowship after that, which was in New York. And there weren't at the time very many OBGYNs that went into genetics, just sort of the general OBGYN to genetics stream. And so really along the way, I've had to explain myself a lot of times, even when I was applying for fellowship, when I was looking for jobs, which is good and bad. It has allowed me to create the job that I have now, which was not a position that was already here at Tufts Medical Center. So what I do here, I am sort of split between the OBGYN department and the pediatrics department. Genetics is in pediatrics, although we serve all patients of all ages. So I take care of fetuses all the way up to elderly patients, anyone who has a genetic condition, has a suspected genetic condition, has family histories of cancer. We have a pretty robust cancer genetics program that I've essentially built this division from almost no clinicians, no genetic counselors to now we have a team of 7 people over the last 4 or so years. I also am a general OBGYN like Dr. Wolcock and Dr. Kaplan. I mostly focus on obstetrics. I don't do gynecology anymore. And I really, really enjoy that part of my job and have the unique opportunity to get to see, talk to patients who may have a fetal anomaly or a mom with a genetic condition that might complicate their pregnancy and sort of get them through that process of labor and delivery. And I say that I have a very special job. I'm the only person in the hospital that can see a couple for preconception counseling, take care of them in their pregnancy, deliver their baby, and then see their baby afterwards in genetics clinic if they need my services. And no one else in the hospital gets to do that, and it feels very special. Like Dr. Wolcock and Dr. Kaplan, and like many Black women in medicine, academic medicine in particular, we are pulled in many different directions. So not only do I have these 2 separate clinical jobs, genetics, I'm the division chief, but I also teach at the medical school. I run the genetics, or I did run the genetics course at the medical school. I serve on an equivalent task force similar to what Dr. Wolcock was talking about, called the Anti-Racism Task Force, that has the same charge in modifying the curriculum and sort of looking at what's going on and making sure that we are changing the way that we're teaching medicine and calling out some of the systemic racism that is what we know is a part of medicine. I am also on the diversity, the Committee for Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity at the Physicians Organization, which is at the hospital. And like Dr. Kaplan mentioned, I am the chair of our telemedicine steering committee, which is charged, prior to COVID, was charged with thinking about telemedicine and how we can incorporate that. And then, very quickly with COVID we are using telemedicine now. How are we using it effectively? So that is one of the 10 hats that I wear. And it's certainly becoming a really interesting piece. Our system here is, we have been sort of incorporated into a larger system called WellForce that has academic, non-academic, community hospitals, and private practices. And so our whole system is merging into that. And so I'm now sort of tasked with sort of this bigger telemedicine effort across our system. So I think it's a theme you'll hear, and a theme that we heard at the Rising Stars panel is that, women and Black women especially are pulled in a lot of directions, and especially with COVID and the murder of George Floyd and sort of this attention paid to systemic racism, a lot of our roles, our voices are being asked to be heard. And whether or not we like it or not, I think a lot of us feel compelled to speak up and say what and give our piece. And it's stressful sometimes, but I think we try to do it to better our colleagues and better our students and better our patients.
So I think one of the things that is ironic, all of our panelists were not actually graduates of EMSSP on the original panel, but we do have two of them right here. I'm sorry if you hear anything in the background, I am actually on labor and delivery. I should be wearing scrubs. Dr. Wilcock is in our academic office. I wanted to make sure that I thanked the advisory board, because I know that it has been with the support of the board that EMSSP has been able to continue to run, and our students have gotten support through fellowships that have often been supported by people on the advisory board. So we very much appreciate that, and think the program is really successful for a lot of what has happened in terms of diversifying the medical student body here. To that end, because we know that medical students, the medical student body nationally is not super diverse, and medicine is not a super diverse field. This is one of the reasons Dr. Crumpler is such an amazing sort of figurehead and role model for us as Black women in medicine. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, we only have a few minutes because I was watching the time. I know I came on, we were a little late, but if you could talk about the experience a little more, about the experience of being a Black woman and a Black student in medicine here, and what that was like for you.
So I'll try to touch on 2 points about, I think during the talk, we talked about how did we end up in medicine? And my story is exposure or lack thereof. So I grew up in Boston, which by many means is a medical and educational mecca, but I grew up in the inner city of Boston where I never saw a Black physician myself. So growing up, it was never anything in my mind as far as what I could be. I wanted to be, I think in high school, I wanted to be a biology teacher because I had never had a Black teacher and I loved biology. It wasn't until I did a program out at UMass Amherst and then at UMass Worcester where I was exposed to anatomy and exposed to medicine that I thought that was maybe something that was somewhat tangible. I had never kind of really been exposed to it. And it just so happened that my senior year of high school, there was a Black guidance counselor that was hired whose wife happened to be an OBGYN. And he found out about me and we tried to set up the shadowing experience. Fortunately, unfortunately, she had a baby, so I never actually got to shadow her, but it was the first time that it was actually a little bit tangible. So, the science thing, I could do this, maybe medicine, I could do that because there was a Black doctor that I saw. I obviously ended up in medicine. So when I first became a physician, for me, it was very, very important for me to be as visible as possible as a Black woman in medicine, which, Dr. Reed alluded to a little bit. It's this idea of the minority tax, that not only do we have to do our job and do it well, but there are so many different things that because we are so rare, we have to do in medicine to make sure that the pipeline still exists, make sure that there's Black and brown doctors coming after us. So my first job was at Beth Israel, which is a very homogeneous, not diverse hospital, but I'm obviously a Black woman. So I made sure that wherever I went, I had my white coat on. If I was going to be out in the community at the health center where I worked, if the kids are outside playing hopscotch, double dutch, whatever it was, I was outside in my white coat so that they could see me, so that I could be something that is tangible to them, so that maybe, just maybe, they could think that they could end up in medicine or become a nurse or whatever it, could be. And so that is something that I think is very important when it comes to thinking about medicine, just making sure that there's exposure. And then Dr. Kaplan, what was the question? I just wanted to make sure I talked about that because exposure is really important.
That was mostly it. I mean, so first of all, I, as I said, I'm very lucky. I ran the early medical school selection program for a little while. And so I think I have some insight into what it's like being a student here and why having the role model of Rebecca Lee Krempler as one of our prior students is so important. But I was hoping you could just mention what it means to come from the place where she was and what that, what that's like.
Yeah. So her existence is visibility to me. Visibility that there has been a Black woman before me, obviously many eons before me, that, I face issues as a Black woman in medicine. I face racism, microaggressions, and, when we think racism, we think big issues. We think, we've seen the murder of George Floyd on TV. We think of that as racism. But as a Black woman, I face microaggressions on a daily basis, both in my personal and professional lives. What that means is I am never mistaken for the physician. I'm always the something else. I am the help. I am the secretary. I'm the unit coordinator. I'm the nurse. Maybe, just maybe I might be the nurse. I'm the transportation.
Nutrition lady.
And so that's, or something that is not the physician. And I can have a conversation with the patient and then they ask me, when is Dr. Wilcock going to come in? Even though I clearly have an ID on my neck that says MD, even though I clearly introduce myself, I'm never the doctor. I will say, though, that at BMC, because we're a little bit more diverse than other hospitals, sometimes are mistaken for the doctor. So it's a little bit less of an issue here than it was at Beth Israel. But having Dr. Crumpler be visible in our school and her name be something that is familiar to people helps make us more visible, so we can be more visible for our patients, more visible for the students that are here at the medical school. We need to exist, and they need to see us and know that we exist so that they know that they are part of a community here. And I would say that is one strength that we have over some other institutions, the fact that we do have more Black and brown doctors at this institution than other hospitals in Boston, so that we can be visible and be a support for the students so they don't feel so isolated. Because medical school is hard, but being isolated in medical school is even harder. And the microaggressions that I face, I have an MD around my neck that I can fall back on. These students don't have that. So I do have a little bit of power in the fact that I've already been successful and already have this degree, but we have to remember that our students don't necessarily have that power yet. So we have to make sure that we empower them.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I remember being a resident and evaluating a patient in labor all night long, delivering the baby. And then she's like, well, when is the doctor coming in? And I just was like, who did you think was examining you all night long? Like, why did you not ask more questions before this moment? You know, and I always introduce myself as Dr. Reed. I even tell my residents, you know, do not introduce yourself by your first name, especially, I mean, in our program, there is almost all female physicians in the OBGYN program here. And so, you know, some of these microaggressions, it's not always clear. Is it because you're a woman? Is it because you look young? Is it because you're a woman of color? And all of that intersects, of course, all the time. So I tell my residents, like, you always need to introduce yourself as Dr. So-and-so. And because you may walk out of the room and they don't know what your role is on the team. Whereas I've been with male medical students and they just assume that's the doctor. And, you know, it's very, very frustrating. But when I think of Rebecca Lee Crumpler, besides the points that Dr. Wilcock was making, you know, in my job I have here at Tufts Medical Center, I am in this very unique position where I'm in both of these departments. When I came here, I was the only geneticist, and that was true up until last summer. So not even a year have there been another geneticist here. And so and genetics just touches every part of medicine. And so I am known in the hospital because if you have a patient with a genetic condition, they come to me. And so that visibility and that sort of singular person doing a singular thing that everybody is looking at is something that I feel like I identify a little bit with Dr. Crumpler. Like, she was somebody who was the only one and people were looking to her. And that same, you know, I appreciated running the genetics course in the first year medical student class, because it was actually the only time they had a woman of color physician teaching them and running a course. And so many of the students, the Black students and the female students would like immediately like cling, you know, they'd be like, oh my God, we got to get to know you. Like, tell us about what you're doing. Like, they could have no interest in OBGYN or genetics, but they would maybe now have an interest just because that's what I'm doing. And they want to talk to me and sort of see what my path was. And it feels, you feel really responsible for their, you know, their path through medical school and their success, really, in a way. And, you know, I'm appreciative that more and more as more of this anti-racism talk is happening, we're talking about systemic racism. It is in the medical curriculum. It is in the medical school class. They're talking about it all of the time. And, you know, just by default, I'm identified as someone that they can come to and talk to about those things and get involved in some of those activities. And so it is needed. Tufts is a much less diverse place than Boston Medical Center. So I am one of the very, very few Black female physicians that are here that are attendings. There is a handful of others, and some of them have come over the time that I've been here. And so, you know, that's kind of how I identify with Dr. Crumpler, is that I, for a long time, was one of the only, and people knew that and would, you know, come to me, especially last year with, you know, George Floyd's murder. It's like all of a sudden, my opinion about these things is the opinion of the Black people, which I've had to be very clear about. Like, I can tell you about my experience. I cannot tell you about someone else's experience or other communities. You know, Black is not one thing, especially in Boston. There are a lot of different communities that identify as Black. And I can just tell you about my experience. And, you know, I'm not even an expert on anti-racism work, right? That's not where I do my academic work. That's not where I do scholarly work. I just know what it's like to be me. And so, you know, I would say over the last year, I felt a lot of pressure, a lot of responsibility, a lot of, you know, stress. And it feels like it just comes with the territory. I take it on. I think I think it's something we have to do, but it's often hard to find that line between, you know, you guys figure it out yourselves and let me help you sort of get to the right place. And it's like always the struggle that I'm having. But I think it's good that at least it's being talked about besides, you know, the three of us, that other people that don't look like us are also taking these things seriously.
I know
But I also think that,
Oh.
I think that also brings up a point, the assumption that because someone belongs to a minority population, that they're interested in diversity. I think we also have to be careful with that, because just because you belong to a certain group doesn't mean that that is your field of expertise or your passion.
Yeah, I say that, I'm sorry, Dr. Kaplan. I say that, you know, of course, this will be my last comment. Of course, I care about diversity and diversity work because it affects me directly, but it is not my like professional passion, right? I'm passionate about genetics and obstetrics and some education things. And so that happens a lot. The assumption is, oh, Dallas wants to be on this committee because she's Black. And I'm like, do I want to be on the committee though? Like how many committees? That's the minority tax thing Ebony was talking about. How many more committees do you want me to be on? You know, when am I gonna further my career in the direction that I want it to go? You know, outside of you telling me what things I should be on because I look a certain way. I'm sorry, Dr. Kaplan.
No. I think it's a great point. I mean, I am very fortunate because I get to do this work and it is what I want to do professionally. And I'm going to say one personal thing about education and then one more thing about BU. And then I know we're going to go to breakout rooms where you certainly can ask us more questions. And obviously we are happy to share more. So I went to the University of Virginia and I had very few Black medical student colleagues. I don't think I ever saw a Black woman physician. And I will tell you, I don't know that I knew that I didn't see one until I came here. I went through residency. I did not have a Black female or Black woman attending role model. And when I got here, I remember thinking, this is Nirvana. And I didn't even know that I wasn't in Nirvana. I had no clue that I had been missing this my entire life, in my professional life. The other thing that I will say is that the work that the medical school does to diversify its student body has paid off in our residencies, in that we have been able to keep people here as residents at Boston Medical Center. And we have also been able to contribute to the attending workforce at Boston Medical Center. Some of that's because the people who come here for medical school are very interested in the mission that the hospital serves. So that's great. But some of that is because we, I think, work very hard to try and create an environment where we say the fact that you are who you are matters to the patients. And we want you to stay here and share the value that you bring because it is so important. And I think that's an amazing thing as well. I would venture to say, and hopefully I will be able to tell you more about this at some point, I think we put more Black and brown doctors and certainly Black women doctors into academia, which means that there will be more role models in the future for more students. I think we probably beat the odds on those numbers.
Very good. I think in view of the time, we'll bring questions to the breakout rooms, but thank you to all of you for sharing your insights. And it really is a testament to the legacy of Rebecca Lee Crumpler. And I think that this is somebody that definitely should be celebrated at our institution. We should be very proud of being first in a very important area. We'll now split up into breakout rooms. This is a chance for the advisors on our board to bring up issues and to discuss with the various groups their concerns. We'd love to hear from you. We have about 20 minutes for this session. We will come back together at the end for a brief summation of the breakout rooms and some closing remarks. And I hope the technology is all set. And I'll turn that over to Corey to send us to our breakout rooms. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like everyone who remains on the call is now back in the main room.
Don, I think you're on mute, but it looks like we might have a little bit of time for report outs if you want.
I think we do, and welcome everyone back. I am reminded of some where I read somewhere that someone had given a 2-hour lecture and had been on mute for the entire time. So thank you for reminding me to unmute. We had a very interesting discussion, and I'm going to ask Dr. McDougall to start. If she could just summarize 1 or 2 key points from the breakout session on telemedicine.
Great. We spoke about a range of topics, but the fact that there's a specialty difference between, psychiatry is one area where telemedicine is for sure working super well, whereas maybe ENT and others where exam is central and hard to deal with telemedicine is maybe trickier. Talked about the need for universal EMR so that transmission of information is seamless for communication. Talked a little bit about wearable technology and how that integrates with telemedicine and how equity really plays a huge role there. I'm sure others have other things that I think we touched upon so many topics that I can't summarize all of them, but we had a really rich conversation.
Thank you. Dr. Mulberger, insights from the COVID-19 research group?
I think it was a great discussion. So of course, everyone was excited about the students, and there was a lot of interest about their future, what they would like to do in the future, where they see themselves in the future. And then there was a question about what will be our future research in terms of viruses. Do we want to stick to SARS-CoV-2? Do we want to broaden to other viruses? And then there was also a lot of interest about the new variants, the new SARS coronavirus variants, or whether or not we could use all these models we developed to test and to investigate these new variants, which are scary to everyone, even to those who are already vaccinated. So I think I was agreement that it is very important work and that you should continue to do it. That's my interpretation.
Thank you very much. And finally, Dr. Kaplan.
Oh, I think there's a lot of interest in understanding upstream work. Dr. Sullivan asked some questions about work that we're doing with students prior to medical school, and recognizing that is really how you can affect the kind of change that would have allowed, let's say, Dr. Wilcock to have had more exposure and more role modeling early on. And then there was also some conversation about how what we see in clinical medicine is it's really it's present in all health allied fields, but also particularly in research in the biomedical sciences and in pharma, and just thinking about how we can expand diversity efforts and reach the clinician scientists who can be impactful, those of color in those other fields, because just like any other field, it is going to be the diverse representation and participation that leads to better care for all of the people.
Great, very good. Well, I'd like to thank all of our presenters and our guests for joining us today. A special thank you to all our board members who've been remarkable supporters of these and many other individuals and programs here at the medical school. Just on a personal note, I want to say that as I graduated from BU Medical School, I was very fortunate over the years to be on the faculty of the other 2 medical institutions in Boston, Tufts and Harvard. But I'm very, very pleased to be back home. So I'd like to just let you know that you shouldn't hesitate to reach out to Dean Antman, the BSM development team, or myself if you have any other additional questions, if we can be of any assistance. And I want you to make a note, please, that the fall Dean's Advisory Board meeting will be scheduled for Thursday, September 30th, 2021, whether it's in person or by Zoom, or probably, hopefully, a combination of the 2. we'd like you to mark your calendars and be sure to be there. On behalf of everyone who's done so much work to prepare for this morning, I'd like to say thank you again to all of you. Stay safe and be well.